but you still continue that morning ritual. You still do those push-ups in the morning. You still do those practice shots, because all of a sudden it isn't about necessarily solving the problem anymore. It's about continuing this ritual that you've established. That is a large part of American bureaucracy right there. It's the idea that we have this ritual, we have all these departments, and it's less about solving the problems than it is about the behind the scenes work that happens to solve the problem. By the time we get to the problem, we've created more because we were so adherent to this process that we've created.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the 49th episode of the Conscious Cast. I'm your host, Cal, along with my other great friend, Mr. Ashton Peterson, right?
Yes, okay. I was like thinking of your last name, and I was like, wait, it's Peterson, right?
Yeah,
it is Peterson. So, for those who do not know, Mr. Ashton is a farmer by day and a historian / bodybuilder by night.
Bodybuilder, not quite, but we're getting there.
Dude, I don't know, man. You made some great progress in, like, what, the last year, right?
I think so.
Yeah, last year. You're really killing it, man.
I started after my senior year in high school.
Heck yeah,
so,
man.
We've been building a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. And I've known Ashton since high school, and unfortunately, we are now friends again in college, which actually, no, he's like one of my really good friends. I see a lot of value in you, you know, and like I was saying earlier, you're very much a different person from individuals in your same type of group, or age group, I should say. Whatever group you belong to, dude. You cisgender.
I'm sorry, man.
Straight male.
These identities that I got, you know, they're a little bit difficult to...
Yeah, for sure, man. And thank you for coming on today. And I think, as I was telling you before, he will bring a lot of value to the podcast today. So, as I was saying before, Ashton is a international studies major, and he's also a bodybuilder. So, you know, professional bodybuilder.
Of course. Let me. Should I whip out my card too? Like my
your IFBB pro card.
Yep.
Yeah, man. But how you doing, dude? How you doing?
I'm doing okay.
Yeah, you're doing okay.
Bit of a busy summer, but not bad.
A busy summer. Yeah. So you're really into So what made you really get into, I guess you could say, history? You know, studying. So for context. Okay. Ashton is very much an individual, like, correct me if I'm wrong, that has a strong passion for learning history. And I think you told me one time, you were like, there is no other person that is obsessed with history as much as I am. For no reason.
I mean, when I was little, I just really loved, like, stories and stuff.
Okay.
And so I love reading, like, the big ones were, like, Lord of the Rings for me. Like, I loved that when I was, like, 12, 13.
Okay.
And what ended up happening was that, like, my grandfather would always have a History Channel on whenever I was at home. So like
the History Channel's dope.
It was back in the days before before like all the reality TV History Channel shows. Mm-hmm. But back in the day, like you guys, all the documentaries used to be run constantly on on that channel.
Yep.
And so he'd always have it on. I was always around that.
Yep.
So it was just like one of the ways I could connect with him.
Yeah.
And then as I started to love stories and stuff more, and you read about it, and it's just a lot of times real life is a lot stranger. It's a lot more interesting than fiction, because like some of the stuff that happens you just can't make up.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so it just progressed from there. Yeah. And so it was history, and I made a name for myself, sort of, in my grade. You know, it was like,
the history buff in your grade. Yeah.
I was that kid that was like always reading those books.
Yep.
So from there.
Yeah, man. I mean, I just remember. I don't know. Oh God, I forget. I think the first time we met was it economics class?
That was economics.
When you were a sophomore and I was a senior. That. I was like, because you would always be hanging out with older kids. In terms of like, I mean, okay, so I wouldn't say you always, but like you had a lot of friends in my grade, right? And so like you were friends with Dalton, you were friends with, you know, Jordan and Owen and Nick Donaldson and all them, you know? And so I think I eventually got to know you through them. And I was like, I remember when I first saw you, I was like, who the fuck is this kid? Like, but as time went on, and I think I knew you before economics, right? But then
maybe
baseball, maybe, but like, I roughly knew you, and I was like, oh God, who the fuck is this kid, man? And then we had economics, and I think we like sat close to each other with Jaden, and like shout out Jaden. I don't know what he's up to. Hopefully he's doing well. But dude, yeah, we got to know each other from there, and I was like, wow, this kid's a fucking smart cookie. He's a dipshit, but he's a smart cookie. Yes. And, you know, I every single time we've we interacted in that class, I was like, how do you know all this stuff?
Like, why do you know? Like, you knew all the factors that affected supply and demand, and you were literally explaining it better to me than Mr. Nick was.
And like, to be fair, Mr. Nick, if you're ever watching this video, I didn't really pay attention in that class.
But you did a good job. So.
I'm happy that I could be your secondary source. You know, straighten all the things out.
Dude.
I mean, like, you just knew so much, you know what I mean? At such a young age. And it was like, did you learn, like, when you, like, looking back on, I mean, not even like history, but like just knowing a lot about just history in general and a lot about like the current world and like relating history back to the current world. Have you found that it like helped you in your upbringing, kind of like helped? Like, did you learn a lot, you know, like just learning that type of information at like, as compared to like trick shotting on Call of Duty, you know?
Oh, well, I can tell you that is not very historically accurate. That's for sure.
No. I'm saying, like, you know, that's something I did, you know, when I was like your age. And,
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I think I've bungled this already. We're already like 5 minutes in. So the thing that it taught me probably the most was just gratitude. Like, you look back at all this like horrible, like bloody shit that happened, and how bad people had it for, I mean, just since the beginning of civilization.
Yeah.
Like, so to the point where, I mean, people were dying of diseases that are pretty much have been eradicated now. How violent, I mean, for perspective, like even with the war in Ukraine going on right now, like this has been like one of the most peaceful 80 years of human history.
Wow, really?
So
interesting. Since like World War II?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's called the Long Peace since 1945 because, well, so far none of the world's great nuclear powers have been engaged in conflict. That might change
because
with
the
Russia
Earth
and
will
China.
not be here.
Well, right, exactly. Mutually assured destruction.
Yeah.
Excellent principle. In theory, deterrence.
What was
is
the
very
principle
nice.
again? Sorry.
Mutually assured destruction.
Okay.
Basically, the idea is that you have a reference, right? You have a reference line, and when one country approaches this reference line, it's the threat of retaliation is enough to stop them from crossing that line.
Okay.
So it's worked in theory pretty well because, I mean, we're still living, right? We still have a civilization here on Earth. But the problem is that, of course, you can't respond to every single problem with a nuclear attack. So what happens, of course, in Ukraine is that Putin can push the envelope. Putin, the president of Russia, if you guys don't know, he can push the envelope in Ukraine, and we can't respond to an invasion of Ukraine with nuclear power, right? Because that would end the world. So it has a good side, which is all of us are still alive, but it has a bad side, which is there's wiggle room there, and sometimes the threat of like that sort of overwhelming superiority, like in response to something. I don't want to like minimize the problem over there, but in response to something that is comparatively smaller, isn't really effective. Isn't a great strategy.
Damn, dude. Because that's really interesting too. Because I remember, like when you said that, I was like, really?
This is like the most peaceful time, and like, you know,
oh my god.
Yeah, and like that just shocked me so much. I don't, and I think, like, just thinking about how like the start, and please correct me if I'm wrong. Like I just remember learning in US AP US history.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You're
I
there.
passed that test, baby.
Whatchamacallit, that like the Cold War, right? Nothing really like physically ever happened, right? And it was more so obviously you had Vietnam, you had all these different types of things. Like it pretty much like, you know, yeah, the Red Scare, you know, like that was from like the 1950s until like early 1990s, I believe, right? The Cold War.
Yes.
And like during that time, it was just more so just like this mental game of people like just like, I have this many nukes, we have this many nukes,
right? Like we're going to, I think it was Reagan that was just like, we're claiming space or whatever, right? Yeah.
Space Force?
Yeah, exactly, right?
Or Star Wars.
Yeah, Star Wars, yeah. And it was just thinking about that, it just people's ego just gets so big, right? And so they'll push, they'll make all these threats, right? And they'll say all these types of things. And I'm not saying nothing happened during this time, right? I'm sure a ton of violent things happened, but like you said, it was the most peaceful 80 years, like, and since humanity has probably ever, you know, whatever, has like ever been here. And I think like just making that jump in terms of like ego, like I have this many nukes, therefore I'm superior, right? It's like when, and do you think ever like someone will actually, instead of just saying it, they'll actually do it? Like, do you think? Because, dude, honestly, it's because, I mean, the U.S. pours trillions of dollars into the military every year, right? And of course, they use it on the military, right, to defend the country. They use it in a lot of things, but at least in my opinion, a lot of that money is just going towards building up that arsenal of just loads and loads of resources that necessarily maybe won't be used. And like, that's just my...
That is the hope. That is the hope. So the idea is that, like I said, deterrence. So we want we want to draw a very fine line.
Yeah.
And so that is basically the principle that has been the principle of foreign policy for like the past 70 years.
Gotcha.
As long as one country can basically eradicate all life on Earth, the idea is to stop them from using that power.
Oh my God. Right? Holy crap.
And that's where policy is really important too, because so what you're talking about, of course, is do I think anyone will ever use them? Is that your question?
Yeah, but like, I mean, do you think anybody will? Because like, we obviously, Hiroshima happened, right? We dropped Nagasaki, like dropped 2 bombs like that. Nothing's really ever been done to that extent, like literally wiped out a whole city, right? Or
2 whole cities.
Yeah, 2 whole cities. I mean, I don't think anything's happened to that extent. I mean,
thank God, those are the only 2 times that nuclear power has ever been used. And those were comparatively small to the power that we have now. So here's a fun one for all you guys. And it's also something I've learned from history.
Yeah.
Gratefulness, of course, very important. Also, like, I wouldn't say living in the moment. It's important to plan for your future.
Of course.
But, I mean, the fact is that time is valuable because, I mean, like, if shit really hits the fan, like, the world could end in 10 minutes.
Dude, it really could, man. And especially the time we're living in now, the technology we have, right? Most people spend most of their days on their phones, right? Most of their days just sucked into their phones, worried about first world problems, right? Like my friend Jason and I.
How do I look in this picture?
Exactly. Like we go golfing, and it's still funny because every time like he hits a bad shot, he's like, "Oh my God, all my first world problems." I'm like, I have it so bad. Like, and then there's people in Africa starving, right?
There's people in Ukraine getting
bombed, right? Like so many people have it incredibly worse. Like the fact that we're even able to film this podcast right now without worrying about bombs dropping over us or feeling that that someone's gonna break in here and maybe like hurt one of us, right? Is incredible, right? Like we're not merely existing, we're living. You know what I mean? We have choice, right? We have our basic needs met and beyond, right? And so I think, like you said before, I've been doing a lot of this myself. It's really being grateful, right? And I think having a historical perspective, right? Whether that be looking back on the Holocaust. I don't know if you've ever heard of Viktor Frankl. Yes. So I've been lightly reading his book. Wow. So pretty much he survived the Holocaust, right? And he's just pretty much is describing the events that happened, right? How he went through it. And like people, he like lived in the concentration camps, right? Those concentration camps were meant for, I think, 200 people, right? And they stockpiled like 1,200 people in like a single camp, right? Camp room. I mean, they would wake up every single day with like feces all over them, right? They would stay in a bed, like with no, furnishing on it, right? It would just be like hardwood, and I mean, just brutal living, brutal human circumstances, that no one should ever go through. And it like just reflecting back on that and looking towards, like an issue in my life, right? And then you compare it to something like that, and you're just like, wow. And it's not to suppress your emotions. It's not to take away from the situation you're currently in, right? Like, of course, if someone like dies, right? That's a big issue. Like that's important. Don't just be like, oh, someone died. Like, oh, 14 million people died in the Holocaust. But I think having that historical perspective, having that gratitude, and just ability to reflect and then relate it to your own life can really help you in circumstances of being like, wow, I have it a lot better than I think I do. You know what I mean? Like what's the truth here?
Take a step back. And like, have you done that a lot of times? Like when looking back on past events, maybe not a lot of times, but have you ever just been like reading maybe about the Holocaust or reading about,
something that happened before the peaceful 80 years. It's just
Yeah.
like, wow, dude. I can't even imagine if I went through that.
It's really tragic.
Yeah.
I mean, like, and as horrible as World War II was, I mean, like you're talking about the Holocaust, 6 million Jews, of course, unfortunately, were killed.
Mhm.
And you talk about World War II in total. I mean, we still don't really know the count,
Yeah.
and it's difficult to quantify because
Yeah.
the numbers, just the magnitude of
Yep.
lost life. But
Yep.
they estimate it at around 70 million lives, or people
Holy
killed. And at this point, Earth's population was about 2.5, 3 billion people.
Wow.
And so you put that in percentage. I'm not a math major. I can't do those types of figures. But I mean, like, just a lot of devastation. Really, really bad stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, one of my favorite time periods to read about. Promise I'm not a sadist. is the Napoleonic Wars.
Ooh,
and
okay. I have no idea what that is. So
it was in the early 1800s.
Early 1800s, okay.
You've probably heard of Napoleon,
Yep,
the French guy,
Yep, French guy.
French emperor.
Heard he wasn't like the nicest guy. I don't.
Probably not, but he was a genius. He was
Oh,
very,
okay.
very smart.
Yeah, because like I see movies
militarily.
about him, and I also see like people like cursing his name. You know what I mean?
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
So
He is hated
yeah.
by a lot of people outside of France. I
Wow.
don't blame him. I don't
Yeah.
blame
Yeah.
him. So, I mean, France at that point, like during the years of the Napoleonic Wars, maybe from like 1804 to 1815, lost like 20% of a single generation. Like, so men aged 19 to 24, which were most likely to serve in his army, the Grand Army. Of course, he's Napoleon. Need a little bit of ego there, right?
Grand Army.
What's the French army? Grand Army. So
Pretty cool name.
until the army got annihilated
Okay.
in Russia, but that's a different story. Then it wasn't so grand.
Just
Sorry. Another thing, history. You have an appreciation for dark humor?
Yeah,
A little bit.
Yeah.
So I mean, like, there's just like ridiculous figures that you hear like from those time periods. Ridiculous numbers. So like I said, 20% of kids they are kids basically, like our age,
Yeah. Just still feels like we're kids.
killed in battle.
Yeah.
Brutally.
Jeez.
So it's definitely an issue of perspective. And I think
Yeah.
what you're going back to earlier about the national defense, like our budget. I'm not a hawk necessarily. Hawk versus dove, meaning like hawk big on war, go out there and go get them. And dove being like, no war.
Okay.
Right? I wouldn't call myself a hawk, but it's difficult to quantify things that don't happen, right? So a lot of people jump on our military budgets, our military budget, military spending, our foreign aid spending, right? And I'm not saying that it's not credible. Like it definitely is. Like, oh, we spend trillions. We spend ungodly amount of money. But the thing is that you can't point to a result and say, you can't point to wars that never happened and say, see, our budget was well spent here because we avoided this conflict. We don't have that type of clarity. So do we risk spending less and inviting the opportunity for someone else to catch up to us?
Gotcha.
So opportunity cost.
So do you think because I mean, once money reaches like even the millions, right?
You lose all proportion of the figures. Like,
Yeah, I mean,
it's crazy.
dude, it's mind-boggling how much money it is, right? And it's like when you compare the top billionaires, right, to like or just people top 1% to us. Or I'm sure you've seen that video of like, like how much they own compared to like middle lower class, right? And it's just like once money gets to that point, it's like that. It's literally pocket change for you, right? It's $1 million for a billionaire is literally pocket change, right? And I just think when money, and like I see what you're saying, once something gets to that point of like spending trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars on like military, right? And of course, this stuff is expensive. There's a lot of things that go on, and it is an incredibly complex issue. I'm not trying to simplify this by any means, nor am I qualified to do so, but I'm just simply having a discussion with someone who knows what's going on. So
a little bit.
Much more than other people for sure. But I think once you spend so much money on like military and that type of stuff, like when is too much, right? And like as you touched on before, like it's difficult to quantify that because you don't have like concrete evidence of like this paid off, because we spent money here. But do you think like there's like a way where we can spend enough money but not necessarily spend like more than it's needed? But like, do you think we're overspending Like, is what I'm trying to ask.
I think we are.
Yeah.
But it's also difficult to say how much we should and shouldn't be spending. So this goes back, of course, to deterrence, because everything in the past 70 years has been about making sure Earth exists. So
It's not doing a good job. I mean,
we're doing good so far, right? We're alive. So
the planet's not in good shape, but we are alive.
we are alive.
Yeah,
and
this is true.
That's good news.
Yeah.
For most of us.
We'll see in the next like 10, 15 years if that's still the case. We'll see though.
So I mean, the idea. Well, one of the. Oh.
No, you're good. You're good.
Oh,
I was
okay.
just checking.
Okay,
Yeah,
my
you're
bad.
good.
So like one of the ideas about. All right, I lost my train of thought. Hold on. No, we're good. Okay, we got it. back.
Deterrence.
Right. So one of the reasons why Reagan spent so much money on our nuclear budget, basically, our nuclear weapons, is because, like you were saying earlier, the ego, the not being, or not really ego necessarily, but not wanting to be outdone, right? Your influence,
exactly.
how you're perceived is very important on the world stage because of how many players there are. So the idea is that if Reagan, and we have a lot of money to spend on that, we're a very stable country. Russia in the 1980s, 1970s, Reagan was 80s, not as stable politically or economically.
Okay.
So Russia understands, or they think that they have to keep up with us. So when Reagan dumps billions of dollars into a nuclear development program, well, Russia, which is a command economy at this point, feels like they need to keep up. And what happens overnight, their economy basically collapses. And so our budget, our military budget, isn't necessarily just to put it, kill people better or more efficiently. It's also to place a pressure on our opponents.
Gotcha.
Whose countries aren't as stable as ours. Like, so for example, our competitor right now is China. To a lesser extent, Russia, very clearly. We have an interest in Southeast Asia. We have Japan as an ally. We want to ensure Australia and India are as potential allies for us. India is sort of doing their own thing right now. They don't like Pakistan. We don't like Pakistan. Pakistan doesn't like us because of what happened with bin Laden. Very complicated. So bin Laden was actually hiding out in Pakistan. And so we violated their national sovereignty when we went and killed them. But of course, I would say that was a good call because bin Laden is dead, obviously responsible for 9/11. So they have their own thing going on between India and Pakistan. But the idea is that if we put pressure on China by spending a lot on our military, we force them to try to keep up with us. Okay. And so it's an indirect way of us trying to keep our supremacy. Of course, military power isn't super important anymore because we could level all of China with a few missiles. They could level us with a few missiles. So boots on the ground isn't as important. And what makes it very complicated now is that it used to be where if we're competing for resources, land that I have and land that I gain gives me substantial amount of value, right? Whereas that's not necessarily true anymore because now we can develop really well domestically and get an edge without having to conquer. So the reason why I'd say that we could probably spend less is because, number one, we don't get as much value from conquering land necessarily, not even that we should be. That's obviously wrong. We have a lot less value as projecting, as being a military power and doing military things, conquering, invading. We get a lot more value from domestic development, I would say. So, and that's how the Dutch turned into a superpower. Basically, they had an excellent amount of they had excellent financial institutions that were pioneered in the 1600s, and they had an excellent navy, and they are essentially they are the country that built the commercial world, and they essentially for a period of 100 years took over the entire planet. So I would say we probably could spend less, but another important factor is that we're also, as of right now, we're the supreme power. We have allies, and we want to show our commitment to those allies by protecting them. So right now, very important situation right now, of course, is in Ukraine. Germany is still demilitarized from World War II. So is Japan, and Japan is directly threatened by China. So if they're constitutional, we wrote the Japanese Constitution, by the way.
I didn't know that.
When the Japanese surrendered in World War II, MacArthur, I believe it was MacArthur, was the Governor General of Japan, and he wrote their constitution, basically our constitution, and then gave it to them and was like, "You're gonna sign this, or else." So
another bomb.
Pretty much, that was the idea. Like, you saw these two, you've got more. So this paper, you better sign it.
Yeah.
Damn. So
did we write Germany's too, or no? Or we had a part in it, right? They're the Treaty of Versailles or whatever. Right?
That was World War One.
Oh shit! All right.
So
sorry.
You're done. You're done.
See this Constitution.
So,
sign it.
Germany was a bit more complicated because have you heard of Yalta?
Maybe.
So it was a conference between the Allied powers, between Stalin, of course, was the ruler of the Soviet Union.
Yep.
And then, of course, the main three Allied powers, France, U.S., Britain. I say main with a little bit of asterisks. Yeah, I mean, most of the fighting was done by Russia.
Gotcha.
The U.S. did a lot in Japan, relatively smaller theater than Europe, but the most casualties were definitely on the Eastern Front between the Germans and the Russians. That was a bloodbath.
Wow.
But basically, there's a long tradition of Russia wanting satellite states. It was true even in the 1800s, even earlier. And so Stalin and Churchill, and I can't remember if FDR was still alive at this point. No, it would have been Truman, and because this is 1945. So FDR dies the end of 1940, beginning of 1944. So these three leaders meet. France doesn't really exist right now, still occupied by Germany, or in the process of being liberated. And so these three leaders essentially break Europe into parts.
Yep.
And so half of Germany is owned by and administered by the Soviet Union. The other half is split into three zones of control: the British, the French, and the Americans. The British and French have their own problems rebuilding the country that was leveled by Germany. So we sort of take control of all of those lands. So we have an East Germany and we have a West Germany. East Germany run by Stalin.
Okay. Oh, is that the Berlin Wall? Is that what broke that?
So
okay.
The Berlin Wall happens in the early 60s. I believe it was 62.
Oh, well, I thought that was in the 90s. Shit.
Well, it falls in the 90s.
Oh, falls. Okay.
But it was built in the 60s as tensions escalate.
Gotcha.
Russia becomes a nuclear power in 1952, and the Cold War is on because we have nukes, they have nukes, separate ideologies, and like this point of conflict usually doesn't end well.
Still coincide.
Well, if the bombs drop, don't worry, kids. You can hide under your desks. You'll be safe, I promise.
Oh, yeah, that too. Can't hide under your ideology either.
Well, you can, and people do.
Yes, you can. But if a bomb drops on your ideology, there goes your ideology.
Yeah, there goes you.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, continue. Go ahead.
So, of course, that was Germany, split between the Allied powers and what would become our enemy, Russia. But Japan was very unilateral. Like, Russia at the end of World War II said they were going to go into Japan with us. They ended up not going into Japan with us. Strategically a good call, because at that point Stalin sort of understood that we were going to be Russia's next enemies. So why should he waste his resources fighting a war with his future enemies, right?
Yeah.
And so all in all, this leads to Japan and Germany and Italy, I think, to a lesser extent, being demilitarized. And it's been that way for a while. So Japan has a defense force, but I think the JSDF, Japanese Security and Defense Force, maybe, but they definitely aren't capable of handling China. And so that's why you see a lot of our aircraft carriers over there. We definitely have a military base in Japan.
Yeah. We have one close. I think Gulf of Tonkin, right, or something like that.
No,
not Gulf of Tonkin. Sorry. There's like a small area near around there that we like. That's our territory, I believe. I'm not too sure.
I'm slipping on this one too.
Maybe it's around. It might be around Vietnam. I'm not sure. I don't know.
I don't know, but there's a lot of islands there, and they're very useful because
I just remember exactly.
Air
Yeah, they're very.
bases,
Yeah, exactly.
naval
Yeah, yeah.
bases.
That's the only reason why I was like, really? Wow. I was like, I didn't know we had some type of territory out there. It's you're not able to travel there on like a vacation. But
definitely not.
Yeah, it's strict access.
It'll be a
for
very
sure.
very short vacation. Yeah, but
Get bombed out of the sky.
no, definitely. And so, of course, so part of our military budget has to go to maintaining our alliances
of
there,
course,
and
of course.
basically projecting our power. So we have to keep China at bay.
Gotcha,
is the
gotcha.
idea. And this is going so far from our self-growth topic. I'm sorry.
No, no, dude, no. I'm loving this, man. This is great, dude. Because like, one, you're providing me with so much information that it's important information too. Because like, someone that's aware of like this type of history and this type of, I guess you could say, tracking war and like, because it's so important because it affects so many people. As we noted before, you said a projected 70 million people died because of World War II, right?
Yeah. World War II.
And it just shows that, like, especially nowadays, we're living in a global economy, right? We're connected,
course.
right? Like we can trade with any country we want, right? That has like the resources and the ability to do so, right? And I just like sit back and I think you would think having, like, of course, we have all these conflicting ideologies. People want power, right? People just want to push their agenda, right? They want the world as they want it, right? For the most part, right? Like they want the world in terms of like their country, right? They want every other country to kind of benefit them, right? In a sense where they have the same type of ideology and have conditions in those types of countries that will allow them to flourish, right? And be the superpower that like China, Russia, and the United States, that, you know, there are all that are the biggest superpowers, but they want that top dog spot. And it just makes me think, it's like, as I was saying before, it's like, how childish do you think this type of stuff is? Because like, it obviously it's very important, right? But you would think with this much connectivity, right? This much ability to do things, right? Top level people, super smart. You'd think we'd be able to come to a solution, right? Somehow, without, I mean, obviously, like you said before, we've been in like the most peaceful period, but I don't know. A lot of this stuff just seems like a grab for power. A lot of this stuff seems real childish, and like, obviously, maybe I'm simplifying it here, but I don't know. It just seems like, really, dude.
It depends on how you look at it.
Okay.
Like, okay, think about this. But I'll offend a lot of people, I think.
It's okay. It's okay.
Okay,
Yeah, just
all your 25 viewers.
exactly.
Sorry.
No, you're good, bro. No, you're not. You're just telling it how it is. It's okay. I'm super offended.
Okay. I mean,
Okay.
I feel like every country, and I'm a big fan of Kissinger. If you don't know who Kissinger is, that's basically, he was responsible for a lot of Nixon's foreign policy. Nixon, of course, is pretty much universally hated here because of Watergate.
Yep.
Fuck you, Nixon.
He did a very good job.
But foreign,
yeah,
my
that's
God.
something we learned.
His foreign
about.
policy was ridiculous.
Yeah, he got back up with Russia. He got it back up with
China.
China.
Yep.
Yeah, the Green Deal and whatever.
The EPA was
Okay.
foreign. That's
Okay.
environmental protection.
Yeah.
Or no, that was domestic. Sorry.
And OPEC, right, or something like that.
OPEC.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Kissinger was his Secretary of State. Big fan. Big Henry Kissinger fan. Also, sort of unrelated, I'm a big fan of Metternich. You probably haven't heard of him, but he was around also during Napoleonic Wars. He was instrumental in creating the basically the peaceful period after Napoleonic Wars. So after Napoleonic Wars ended in 1815, there wasn't another major European war until 1914, which of course is World War I. Yep. So him and his other diplomats that were responsible for crafting that peace basically guaranteed about a century of European peace, which is really impressive because all of Europe was basically stuffed with imperial powers that were like, at each other's throats.
Yeah.
So the fact that he was able to like establish a balance of power and then keep that peace, even after he was long dead, very impressive.
It's very complex, right? It's a very hard thing to do. Yeah, it's like, I think for me to call it childish, right, is definitely a simplification of it because.
But I think you're right. I think a lot of people agree with you though.
Yeah.
Because like it seems stupid that we would fight and kill each other over things that are just overall seem silly, right? Like But what's important is that people have a sense of national destiny. Countries have a sense of national destiny. Okay. Let me ask you. This is very simplified. Would you rather live in a democracy or would you rather live in a dictatorship?
Democracy.
Because you're American. And that's not to say that other people don't appreciate democracy. Obviously, there's been protests about democracy worldwide.
Yep.
But America, manifest destiny, this idea that we're spreading the glory that is America to across the land, right? And then across the seas.
Yep.
We're going to force our own flavor of democracy down other people, onto other people, right? So that's
they might not want that either.
Exactly, and that's a form of our own national destiny. We think that's our calling. We think that we're going to, for better or worse, we want to protect the world and ensure freedom, and that's. Like obviously that comes with a ton of caveats because we've done some really bad stuff, especially in the past, especially in the Cold War. As like and of course we justify it because means to an end, right? Yep. And if our end is good, therefore our means must be justified.
Yep.
And when you look at that across other countries, other cultures, they also have this sense of national destiny, right? So when you look at a lot of conflicts, there obviously is a material element to it. There's an influence element to it. Yeah. Like you have this physical thing that I want. You have this resource that I want. Yep. So I'm going to go in there and take it from you, whether you like it or not. But at the same time, you're not going to get the dedication that you need from your people unless you also have like a mission statement. And so a lot of the issues that we run into is according to Kissinger, is not necessarily competition for resources, but the clash of ideologies, the clash of national destinies, right? And so we have our American national destiny. The Chinese have their own belief in their own destiny, and both of those involve ruling the world more or less. So we've come head to head. And that's obviously been a major issue, hopefully one that doesn't end the world. So on the one hand, it does seem silly. It seems silly that we would spend so much time, spend so much energy, and try to influence all these places to do what we want them to do for something that in the long run doesn't really mean much for you or I, like you and I.
Absolutely.
Like for instance, like if we have a great relationship with Bangladesh and Vietnam, very large clothes manufacturing countries, maybe that means our jeans and our shirts are a little less expensive. But in the long run, that doesn't mean too much. But when it comes to government, it means a lot. And when you have, and this is particular in the U.S., it becomes less about the actual problem at hand and more about the way in which you solve it. Like if you create a ritual, so if you create a ritual in the morning, right? Like you have a morning ritual that you do, and maybe you're a videographer, right? Yep. And you want to master a certain skill.
Pray to my camera.
Yeah, exactly, right? I'm gonna keep looking at that.
Yeah. Just glance at it every now and then.
And you have a morning ritual that you think is going to improve your skill as a videographer, right? So let's say that you want to do a series of practice shots in the morning. Yep. Or if you're a lifter, so let's say you want to get your bench up. You start doing some push-ups in the morning when you wake up. Well, all of a sudden, maybe you've reached your goal, you've solved your problem, you've become a better videographer, you've become a better lifter, but you still continue that morning ritual, right? You still do those push-ups in the morning. You still do those practice shots because all of a sudden it isn't about necessarily solving the problem anymore. It's about continuing this ritual that you've established. And that is a large part of American bureaucracy right there. It's the idea that we have this ritual, we have all these departments, and it's less about solving the problems than it is about the behind-the-scenes work that happens to solve the problem. So by the time we get to the problem, we've created more because we're so adherent to this process that we've created.
Yeah, and that process is the system, right? The system, when I say system, I mean like how we go about things, right? Like our philosophy towards handling issues, right? Am I correct? But is that
clarify?
So like kind of like the ritual that you're talking about, like how and like
maybe I'm interpreting this wrong, but like how we go about handling foreign issues and domestic issues.
Yeah.
It's kind of like obviously we take different approaches, right? But it's always within that boundary of like our own ideology, right? And so for us to make a and like this is something Russell Brand and a lot of like anarchists, when I say anarchists, I mean individuals that want decentralized power, right? Okay. Not like anarchy, right? Just full a way that you could have like a decentralized government, but still have individual rights at the same time, like property and like but I think when what was I saying before that?
Russell Brand, anarchist.
Right before that. What was I saying?
As you approach a problem.
Oh yeah, okay. Yeah, so it's like we've already established this procedure, right? This systematic way about going about things, and like you beautifully touched on, right? It's just like for us to deviate from that ritual, from that habit of how we've always done things.
It's a problem in of itself. It feels wrong.
That's the root of the problem, right? I mean, at least that's what I'm thinking about. And of course, like how we go about things right now. There is definitely benefit to that, of course. But as you noted, that causes a lot of other problems, both internally and externally, right?
Of course. So, I mean, what ends up happening is that, like, number one, the world stage has never been this big. So, all of diplomacy used to happen in Europe because Europe was all the world's powers. And Europe, for the most part, as different as it is, it's also very homogeneous in the sense where people in Europe tend to think very similarly.
Gotcha.
And so, and over time, as Europe became interconnected with each other, mostly through conflict, there was a common understanding of how things should be done and how things are done, right? And that sounds a little bit like, basically there were these guidelines that everyone followed, everyone understood these unspoken and often codified rules.
Yep.
So the issue is that now that other countries, it's not an issue per se, it just makes it more complicated. Other countries with other ideas of different guidelines, different ideologies, different processes, they all enter the world stage. And so all of a sudden, centuries of very, very simple communication lines, because Europe and America, very similar, all of a sudden they've been muddled because now we have to figure out the new processes and the new cultures and the new ways in which we communicate with people that are now far, far more important than they were, right? So that element of diversity has made things really, really good because it allows access to more ideas, but it makes things more difficult because now we have to establish those lines of communication, and doing that in the first place causes issues. So and there's obviously a difference between language, like obviously like you can easily translate a language, but can you translate the connotation that those words have? That's not so easy.
Yeah.
So we've run into another issue where our process is very, very different from other people's established processes. And so, and the thing about the U.S. is that our bureaucracy, basically our network of unelected officials, are very, very good at solving problems when they come up. Whether you agree with that or not, I guess it depends. But for the most part, we're stable. We're a stable country.
Yeah, definitely.
Regardless,
a lot of social issues.
Regardless of our social issues, for the most part, we're good. I'm looking.
Okay, cool. Yeah, just let me know. Yeah.
So, regardless of our social issues, we're pretty stable. Like to the point where, it's like, this is going to be a bad example. Most people trust the elections, other than very recently. It's a different problem altogether. But like when you go and you vote, like you know that your ballot is going to be counted. Like you know that for the most part you're not going to starve if you live in America. So this idea is that our bureaucracy is good at solving problems once they've arisen, but we're not so good at avoiding them because the future doesn't have a constituency. And what that means is if you're looking for political support, right? So, and you've identified a problem. Well, what if solving this problem creates problem B? So let's get a very stupid example here. Your microphone's broken. You know it's going to break eventually, let's say. And But are you going to get one as soon as you know it's going to break, or are you going to wait until it breaks?
Wait until it breaks.
Right. So if you have
gotcha.
if you're and this is owned by CCSU.
Yep.
This microphone.
Don't break it.
Right. Well, actually, so you're gonna have a hard time going to the CCSU board and being like, my microphone's gonna break in a week or so. I can see it's hanging in there still. It still works. But I need $300 to get a new one. They're gonna be like, kid, get out of the door. Get out of here. But when you present them the broken microphone, you're gonna get your replacement money for sure.
Okay.
And so that's the way it works. Is that it's difficult to garner support for a problem that hasn't manifested itself yet.
Damn.
So what ends up happening is that we're good at solving problems when they pop up, but the idea is that we wait for them to happen because that's when all the voters turn out.
Yep. Damn, dude. Holy.
So there you go. Like that's one of those things. Like you can't let problems sit on them. You can't sit on problems. You have to address them.
Yeah.
The problem is that I've said problems a lot now. I'm counting. Issues, right? Is that you can't sit on your problems, but it's easier to get support if you do. Maybe that doesn't make sense.
No, dude, I think that's right on the money, man. Because a lot of
save me.
No, for sure. Yeah, sorry if I felt like you were being abandoned there. Yeah, I'm just gonna sit over here. No, but it's so true because a lot of times, and especially like with the system we're living in now, as you noted before, like there used to be a lot more trust in the government until Watergate started happening, Gulf of Tonkin. Yep. Like that's when people were like, the government's not telling us exactly what's going on, right?
Yeah.
Like there's no marketing or persuasion or rhetoric here like going on. Of course, that's what was going on, but like the people just believe what was on their television. I'm not saying everyone was, but a lot less people. But nowadays, people are questioning everything, right? Like, and even my own family, right, who watches the news, like, but not religiously, but like they get a majority of their information from the news. I remember like during the pandemic, they were like, dude, I cannot watch the news anymore. Like, this is terrible, right? It's just fear mongering on like so much, right?
A lot of like, and this is my personal interpretation of it. It's that and you're an excellent example. You're a pioneer, more or less. Like podcasting is really, 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 really big. It's going to explode.
Yeah.
So the idea is that, radio, all these established like communication media institutions, they're all on the way out. Like, so if you're a news corporations like Fox or like CNN, you're not looking at your future too brightly. Like people aren't watching cable news. They don't watch it. The people that watch TV are our grandparents' age.
Yeah, or older people.
Unfortunately, most of them are gonna be dead in 20 years.
Yeah.
And so the idea is that if you're CEO, you're a for-profit organization, more or less. You're reporting news, and your mission statement might be to report accurate news, but at the end of the day, you have a bottom line to investors, and obviously to the employees of your company. You need the money to stay in operation.
Yeah.
But if you're a news corporation, your time is running out because it's going to be replaced by the internet.
Yeah.
We don't watch the news.
Yeah.
We check our phones.
Exactly.
Yep. And what's amazing, it's a little dangerous because it's still like we're in the wild west of the internet.
Of course. Yep.
So
before it becomes centralized.
Oh, of course.
I hope it doesn't.
I hope so too.
You hope it does or doesn't?
I hope so. I hope it doesn't.
Okay,
Right,
good.
right.
Yeah.
Keep information.
Yeah.
The idea is that more people would rather listen to an independent journalist on, let's say, like a writing platform like Substack,
Absolutely.
or someone on YouTube.
Yeah.
Just some like crazy guy. That's
It's a brand.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, talk about crazy, dude.
So-
He gets labels as a conspiracy theorist all the time.
So, I mean, if you're a cable news network and you have competition that you can't beat, why should you bother trying to invest in the future of your company? What you want is a cash grab.
Yeah.
So if you're CNN, if you're MSNBC, if you're Fox News,
You know you're on the way out. Yeah.
you're on the way out. What are you going to do? You want views and you want them now.
Yeah.
So you're just going to come up with the most sensational stuff.
Yeah.
And you're going to publish it as like it's news. And people fall for it.
Yeah.
And so the best thing you can do to get accurate information about the world as it stands stop watching cable news. Stop watching cable news.
Yeah.
So I think you're right. Their business model has changed.
Yep.
It's about making money. It's about maximizing their revenue before inevitably they sink.
Yeah. And what stinks is, as you touched on before, they only mention issues that appear as like prevalent issues, right? But there are issues that aren't talked about, right, all the time. Like, and I'm not trying to, minimize the Ukraine-Russia conflict here, right? That's, I mean, at least in my opinion, it was very interesting how that conflict started, right? And then they just started to focus on that one event, right? But all around it, and I'm not like a scholar by any means in this area, but there's issues going on in the Middle East, right? And like they paint a narrative, right? And there's truthful information in that narrative, right? But they're missing a lot of other information, right?
And that's the difficulty. Sorry, I just cut you off.
You're good. You're good. Perfect. Go ahead.
That's the difficulty of like independent journalism, because what you choose to report on shows a bias even in of itself.
Of course. Yep.
So
like I'm biased even now. Like everyone is. Yeah, to some
course.
extent. Yeah.
So like choosing to report on Russia and Ukraine versus choosing to report on, let's say, domestic inflation is indicative of your own personal bias.
Yeah.
If you have a certain amount of airtime and you choose one over the other to air, that's indicative of some sort of personal bias.
But I do think it goes beyond just your own personal bias. Like I think they intentionally do it, right? Like they
of course.
like we were touching on before, they intentionally do it in order to have control over their viewers in terms of like where their beliefs are, where their values are, right? And just allow for like that advertising cycle to continue on and on.
I think people they read it as like, oh, these evil corporations trying to take
yeah.
over.
Yep.
I don't read it like that.
Okay.
I think it's more like I don't think that like anyone on the far left or far right owns Fox or MSNBC and is like, yeah, we're gonna turn America into this image.
Yeah. Huh.
Maybe that's the case. I think it's a board of investors that say, yeah, our future isn't looking too good. This is the best way we can make money, and it's just exploded and taken off, and there's been unintended consequences.
Yeah, and I don't think anybody working at these corporations is necessarily a bad person, right? I'm sure there's like you said before, there is bad people in these types of things that are trying to push an agenda, that are trying to push certain things, right? But I think it's mainly a systematic issue, right? The fact that these companies are for profit, right? And that's their bottom line, right? Rather than having a bottom line that is not based on profit, maybe be reporting transparent, open information like that. Like I'm not sure what type of bottom line that would be, but that should be their top priority, right? Their priority should be to push the news, right, in an objective manner and allow individuals to discern for themselves, right? At least in my opinion, right? But the fact that they have this bottom line, right, that's based on profit, when that intertwines with reporting objective information, those don't always coincide, right? And meaning it's always going to line up as that, right? So they'll make it appear as though that's what it is, but that's not the case, right? And it's clear as day to me. And I'm not saying the information they're reporting is fallacious, right? There's been many instances of false, what's the term?
Fake news.
Fake news, yeah. Like, there's rhetoric, propaganda everywhere. Like everyone wants your attention, right? And that's the biggest thing nowadays. But I think not being able to have this type of system set up, right? Like living in this capitalistic society, right, where the goal is to make money. I think we really got to take a step back and think about radical systematic change, right? And whether that it's not going to be an overnight thing, right? Of course, it's going to take time, but I think there has to be a change, right? And I think it is slowly happening, right? The news is on the way out, right? But I think
this type of news, what it's going to be replaced by, we'll see. Like for more or less, there's a news infrastructure. So, yeah, we're still alive. So CNN has the money to send a reporter and protect this reporter in a hot spot like Israel or in Palestine or in Ukraine. So maybe that's a pro. Obviously, is it? And they can't just lie to you. More or less.
Of course.
So they can spin it. They can twist it on you.
Yeah.
The thing if they lie to you, they'll be called out.
Yeah.
Does it really matter? No.
Yeah, I think it's the way they spin it. Yeah, that's that's the big thing.
Retractions are never read. Like if there's a false story, false stories always on page 1, and the retractions always on page 4.
Exactly.
So you just like just pumping out headlines is the best way to create hysteria.
Yeah.
But I mean, like, do small journalists have the money to travel and report?
Oh.
And if you're paying $5 for Matt Taibbi on Substack, chances are that he's not doing much traveling on his budget,
Probably because he's banned from every other news platform except Fox, I think, right? Yeah.
Dude, it's crazy.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
God. Yeah, man.
It's just like in that cycle of just like each side just polarizing the other. It's
back and forth.
Continues.
It's the power grab too, right? And it's so important. It's so important for them, but for I think the best thing for us is to not get sucked into that, because it will literally ruin your life in terms of like your mental health and
ideologies.
Extremely
dangerous.
Yeah, and you won't want to have a conversation with anybody. Like
what people have to understand is that like the people that actually believe in like crazy ideas, like obviously the most pressing right now, especially after the Buffalo shooting, is white supremacy.
Yep.
The people that actually believe in that, or the people that believe in like the far left ideologies, like Antifa or the communists, communism, stuff like that. I mean, you get a few communist jokers.
Yeah,
right?
of course.
But a lot of those kids are like 19, they're like our age, and they have no idea what they're talking
damn
about.
commie.
Yeah, like they're like, oh yeah, people should have welfare. Like people should have like access to this and access to that. Oh, guess I'm a socialist, but do they actually understand what they're saying?
No,
absolutely not.
Yeah.
The actual people that are dedicated to those very fringe ideologies, what we would consider fringe ideologies, and like socialism, obviously far more palatable in other parts of the world.
Yep.
Very, very small percentage of people in the United States. But those people are the most sensational, and they drive the most stories. And when you drive the stories, you make the revenue for those big news corporations.
Yep.
So, and what the problem is that sort of on a deeper level is that just because I vote for one party doesn't mean I necessarily like that party. It just means I hate the other party more. Right? So, I mean, I doubt very many people enjoyed trying to pick between Trump or Biden. Yeah. Like neither of them are good candidates, if we're being honest.
Yeah.
But Biden won not because he was liked, but because he was less hated than Trump. And I think I'm not a poll expert, but I think it was probably the same case between Trump and Clinton. Like, Trump wasn't great, but
just less
Hillary.
Damn, dude. Think about that for a second.
So we have a system where, we don't reward good policy. We reward sensationalism. We reward people that.
It's a stage, man, right?
Of
course. It's a theater. And Russell Brand makes the argument that, and I don't know if I necessarily agree with him because I'm not well educated enough, but he's like, no matter who's in power on that stage, we're not talking about local stuff. We're talking about President of the United States, government official or something like that, elected positions, right?
Sure.
And maybe he's wrong, but he's like, what I've learned, man, and like that over my like years and years and years of like independent journalism, because he is an independent journalist. He reports on stories, mixture of stories, synthesizes information, comes to conclusions, and a shit ton of people watch him and agree with him and disagree with him. But he's like, no, it doesn't make a difference who's in power, right? Because the system. He's like, the problem is not with the individual, right? But the media will make it seem that way. He says the problem is with the system, right? And like as we touched on before, and you nailed that shit right on the head, right? We've have this major problem, and many people are talking about it right now.
And
right?
What problem are you talking about?
The system, right? Okay. That breeds these conditions.
Well, the system's very large.
Yeah, no,
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, man.
So I mean, like we have a massive bureaucracy, right?
Yep.
And for the most part, the bureaucracy does. A lot of people are going to disagree with me on this one. Again, I think it does a decent job. I mean, obviously, we've had our ups and downs, but for the most part, we're the most wealthy country in the world.
Yeah,
right?
I agree.
So the issue, of course, is that when you say, oh, the system's the problem, well, the system's so massive, Like the
So I think I need to put a little asterisk when I said the system. When I said having the system as a for-profit type of system, like that, like this part of the system. That's what I meant to say.
I understand what you're talking about.
No.
So
Not the entire system itself.
this touches on something else too, I think.
yeah.
So I mean, like, there are obviously, I'm interested a lot in economics.
Yep.
So the way that we'd approach that is to identify things in terms of their opportunity cost. So one of the major, or the cost of you not doing something, or there are trade-offs to everything.
Yep.
So I mean, we could use the Scandinavian countries as an example, let's say. And so a lot of Americans would look at Scandinavia, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, in a way, Iceland and Finland, not as Nordic per se politically as those core three.
Yep.
But we tend to look at them and we tend to label them as socialists, right? Mm-hmm. Like, oh, they have a welfare system, they must be a socialist country. So, I mean, so the thing is that there's a lot of redistribution there, but that doesn't necessarily make you a socialist country, and they actually still have a free market, so that you can buy and trade without restriction for the most part. But there's trade-offs to that. There's trade-offs to that relationship. So, for example, we have some of the best health outcomes in the world, which is really impressive considering that 1/3 of our population has a comorbidity, obesity. So the fact that you can go to the doctor for cancer and have generally a good chance to survive is pretty impressive. Considering the factors, considering how large the world is, this is the location to be. If you're going to be sick, if there's a problem with you, you better come here. You're going to get the best treatment here. It's going to be expensive. If you're getting one arm fixed, it might cost you your other arm. But
it might cost you a shit ton of money, but
you'll live.
You'll live. Yeah.
Chances are your arm's going to be fine. In my theoretical, your arm's going to be fine. Cal,
Dr. Peterson.
Thank you. But
yeah, I get what you're saying though, for sure.
So the issue, of course, with this sort of course is that it creates a lot of inequality, which we know, unfortunately, and inequality creates social stability problems between the perceived rich and the perceived poor. But at the same time, with that inequality comes massive amounts of innovation. So we sacrifice equity, but in return, we gain technological advancement. These Nordic countries that we talk about as being like socialists because they're just they're welfare states. They've flipped that. So they've sacrificed the incentive for innovation that massive profit provides. In return, they have a more equal society. Damn. Wow. So they have a lot of, but that's also part of culture, right? Because like a lot of America is very individualistic, and that comes partially from like this sort of like Protestant work ethic that came over in the 1600s. The initial founders of what we would consider to be the U.S. were
white America.
Yes, sir. They were Calvinists.
No, don't get offended by that. Please don't.
They were Calvinists,
yep.
right? They were fleeing from the Catholics in Europe. They came here. Very good time to flee. Europe was a bloodbath in the 1620s. And essentially, the foundation of trade, the foundation of the U.S., like this like psychology that we have, comes from that. Where like if you're a hard worker and you're rewarded with material possessions, it must mean that you're one of God's elect. You're destined to inherit heaven when you die. So this individual culture drives innovation. It drives this idea that we should be making money and it should be us. It should be on us to do so. Other countries, we have a very competitive outlook, and competition, in a sense, it creates progress.
Breeds innovation.
It does. But at the same time, people tend to get left in the dust. So it's just a difference of social perspective. Whereas, maybe in Scandinavia, it's more focused on cooperation, where we're a community and we're going to survive as a community. Whereas here, it might be I'm competing and I'm going to thrive as an individual. And like I said, trade-offs, pros and cons. So we produce the most advanced medical technology in the world, but we also have a lot of impoverished people. Does Sweden, can they even hope to produce what we produce? No. is their standard of living relatively higher? That's also difficult to say because it's difficult to quantify inequality. So this is going to be a little bit of a tangent, but like if you look at a country like the Netherlands, so have you heard of the Gini coefficient?
I have not.
It's a number that measures the amount of concentration of wealth or the concentration of resources. Oh. So 0 on the Gini coefficient would be everyone has exactly equal amounts of resources, amounts of money, amounts of wealth, amounts of whatever. 1 would be all of it is concentrated in a single individual where no one else has anything and that one person has everything. So that would be a 1. So in terms of wealth, our Gini coefficient is lower. A lot of Gini coefficients are lower than Netherlands, right? But Netherlands is a fabulous system of like welfare system.
Yeah, they have more centralized power, right? And no. I mean, I know they have higher taxes, so they're able to do. Yeah, okay, gotcha.
They have a redistribution center, or a way to do it more or less.
Yeah,
a system for it.
Yeah, yep.
But if you look at just the Gini number, it would be like a feudal society, and there are underlying reasons for that. So sometimes it's difficult to look at figures, and then people look at figures and jump to conclusions.
Yep.
But there's a story behind those figures. Like for example, Ethiopia, I believe, or maybe it's Somalia. One of the two of those countries actually has a lower Gini coefficient, or than the Netherlands. But no one in their right mind would rather live in Ethiopia or Somalia than, the Netherlands.
Yep.
So I mean, like, yeah, Somalia and Ethiopia are more equal than the Netherlands, but are you sure you want to live there?
Yeah.
Probably not.
Yeah.
So sometimes looking beyond the numbers definitely tells a story there. Mm-hmm. And of course, the U.S., we have the largest GDP per capita in the world, or the largest amount of goods produced per se, per person in the world. But of course, that figure's dragged up a lot by these extreme outliers, these billionaires that we have. So in a sense, statistics is also it's like one of the best ways to get to the bottom. It's one of the best, most objective things that we can use to measure. Yep. But at the same time, a lot of statistics is
garbage.
Right, because we can't
quantify social issues. Yeah.
Things that don't have numbers. Like how do you value someone's life? Like how do you assign a number to that? You can't.
Yeah, man. I mean, dude. I mean, it's so true because I remember we talked about this in my business class, right? There's always trade-offs, right? You're always trading the short term for the long term, right? And these big corporations, they can tackle major social issues such as global warming, right? And then they can also tackle social issues such as, women and people of color having a better opportunity to get a job in the workplace, and stuff like that. And you have helped me a lot understand that. Would I rather have better technological advancement than necessarily fairness, right? Like obviously I'm saying this as a white male in a privileged society, right? But I think right now what we're trying to do is we have all this technological innovation, right?
Right.
But we're trying to find a way where we can balance those two things. But as you noted, they can't really be balanced, right? It's tough. It's really hard to do. And when the system that we have in place, right, like it has many benefits, right? But it can be better. And I think a lot of times people, maybe this be politicians, maybe this be unelected officials, maybe this be billionaires, right? They want to keep the system the way it is because in part of the system, I should say, the way it is in certain conditions that it has to benefit them, right? And to help them meet their bottom line. Because as we touched on before, countries are constantly trying to push their ideologies, always trying to set up conditions that favor them, right? And so there's certain issues that are on the individual, but then there are certain issues that are on the system. And I think it's very complex and it's very hard to understand. And I think a lot of people, and myself included, I'm guilty of this myself, can run away with conclusions, be like, it's the system. It's always been the system. Yes, is it the system? I do believe so. Is it partly on the individual, right? In terms of what they're purchasing, right? So maybe that be like meat products, right? You're trying to stop demand in that, right? It's introduce more plant products. Yeah, I think it's more of an individual and system problem, but it's incredibly complex, and yeah, man, it's crazy. But
It is.
yeah, I think that is damn, man. We talked for a fat minute, dude.
How long was that?
That was like an hour and 10 minutes, I believe. So
Damn,
yeah,
I'm
dude.
Sorry, man. I sort of rambled.
Dude, that was awesome, bro. That was great. I think, dude. Oh my god, I knew you were smart. I didn't know you were that smart. But is there anything else you wanted to say, man? And we'll have you on again, so don't worry.
Ooh. Yeah, next time.
Yeah, I'm not coming next time.
It was a pleasure.
It was a pleasure.
I'd love to come back.
Oh, you
It's
will
kinda
be,
fun.
man, later this summer for sure. And we'll dive more into your individual story
Oh,
for
no,
sure.
I'm not that interested.
Oh, dude, no, I mean, we'll have another conversation. We'll see where it goes. But, ladies and gentlemen, that has been episode 49 of the Conscious Cast. Where can they find you, my man?
Nowhere yet, but I'm working on it.
What's your Instagram?
Oh, Ashton J.P.
J.P. So if you want to go follow him on there, I'll link it down below. So with all that being said, love yourself because I love you, and we are clocking out, people. Peace.